That's okay. The committee will come to order. I had a chance to visit briefly with our witnesses. They're so excited to be here, and we're excited to have you. A couple of them are a little nervous, so I told them we'd go easy on them. So it'll be no big deal. So I want to thank you again to our guests and witnesses for joining us today for this important hearing to review what we can do to help more parents go to work and help families escape poverty. We clearly have lots of work to do as we enter the 6th year of the so-called Obama recovery. Not only has this been the worst recovery for jobs and growth ever, but record numbers of Americans are not working or working only temporary jobs. More people dropped out of the workforce during this recovery than during the recession that preceded it. And the median household income is down over $2,000 since this recovery started, all of which may be why nearly half of Americans think that the U.S. is still in a recession. Over 5.5 years after Democrats' trillion-dollar stimulus plan, Americans are still asking, where are the jobs? Make no mistake, work is not only what parents need and what they're looking for, it is the only real path out of poverty. We know this implicitly, and the data confirms it. Less than 3% of full-time workers are in poverty, while the poverty rate for people who don't work is 10 times higher. Work also addresses inequality, the inequality of households in the bottom 20% of the earnings ladder. Less than 1 in 5 had a household member working full-time, and more than 60% had no one in the household who was working at all. In contrast, households in the top 20% of earners had an average 2 workers in the household, with almost all of them working full-time. And looking back, we see the 1996 welfare reforms confirm the centrality of work to reducing poverty. Since the work-based 1996 welfare reforms were enacted, the employment rate of welfare recipients more than doubled, and child poverty rates fell dramatically and are still below the level in the early 1990s. Welfare caseloads have declined by 60%, and still in many places, loopholes have allowed states to keep welfare recipients on the rolls too long without working, reducing their income and increasing their dependence on taxpayers. States now spend only a small share of their TANF funding, 6% in 2013, on activities designed to get welfare recipients back to work. The most recent data from states for 2011 shows almost 60% of adults on TANF who were required to work had no reported hours in any work or work-related activity. So the question is this: how can we get more low-income adults into jobs so they can better support their families and move up the economic ladder? And as we will learn in the testimony today, one approach to achieving this goal is through supporting subsidized jobs. For years, some states have placed welfare recipients in subsidized jobs, providing payments to public and private employers to hire welfare recipients so they earn a paycheck instead of just collecting a welfare check. The goal of this approach is for the job to continue even after the subsidy ends, but it doesn't always work that way, and raising concerns about effectiveness and cost of such efforts compared to other approaches is legitimate. We hope to review those sorts of issues today to determine how these types of programs can help low-income families escape poverty. The bigger picture is important, too. If we want to promote subsidized jobs or any other way of helping welfare recipients go to work, we simply will not make any progress while the administration continues to insist it can waive precisely these sorts of policies. The irony is, when the administration announced its TANF waiver policy 2 years ago, we were working together across party lines to close loopholes that weakened welfare back-to-work rules. Those loopholes remain wide open today. We can and should revisit ways to close those loopholes, along with discussing ways to implement ideas like promoting subsidized jobs in the months ahead. But if the administration continues to insist, it can simply waive any of the rules Congress creates. It is very unlikely that that will happen. I look forward to today's testimony and our continuing work together on ways to help low-income parents find the work they so desperately need and want. And Mr. Doggett, you're now recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I believe that our objective should be to encourage innovation without wasting taxpayer money on programs that don't work, that are not cost-effective. There's not enough TANF block grant money available now to adequately fund existing programs designed to help poor people secure stable employment, and that's despite the fact that each year TANF continues to serve a smaller and smaller share of poor families. Since no additional resources are being proposed to help lift people out of poverty, we're really in a zero-sum game situation here. Every dollar that we shift to subsidize employment means a dollar less for some other initiative. That doesn't mean it's not a good idea to shift money into subsidized employment. It just means that we need to scrutinize what we're moving it into carefully and what we're moving it out of carefully. Our decisions should be guided by what the evidence shows, not what ideology dictates. Before we divert more TANF funds to any particular initiative, let's ensure that we have that kind of objective evidence to justify how the money's being allocated. Probably the greatest potential for subsidized employment is for those individuals who face the greatest barriers to being hired: ex-offenders, those with serious physical or mental health issues, long-term unemployed, and older workers who often face discrimination. I know that one of our witnesses that I look forward to hearing from, Ms. Collins, will tell us about the transformative effect that such a program had on her life, and I'm sure that's true of many others. Overall, however, the evidence is modest and it's mixed as to whether subsidized employment programs are actually effective, cost-effective, in helping a substantial number of poor people secure a stable job at a wage that will help them escape poverty. Certainly, the offer of free or almost free taxpayer-financed labor would have appeal to most any business. The question is whether, when the taxpayer subsidy ends, does the job end also, or does it truly open the way to long-term unemployment, to long-term employment, not unemployment? Does subsidized employment offer an opportunity, or is it just another windfall? I think the verdict is largely still out, but probably to ensure more opportunity through subsidized employment, where it does appear to work, we need some strong safeguards in place to protect the taxpayer investment that is at stake. Today's hearing is another way to scrutinize the potential of expanding subsidized employment programs to more people, and it deserves the same care and attention that the subcommittee has applied in previous hearings to other types of public expenditures. I know that Mr. Bloom's testimony indicates that most subsidized employment programs that have been tested have not produced the sustained increases in unsubsidized employment we'd like to see. And Mr. Dorr writes that in his experience, running a subsidized employment program sometimes proves to be an expensive intervention that was not necessarily more effective than some less costly strategies at trying to get people from welfare to work. Today is an opportunity to learn more about these programs and their effectiveness. It will also help us to determine whether we can make decisions to support programs based on evidence or whether we'll simply rely on ideology as a guide. I agree that the TANF program, set to expire at the end of September, very soon, is long overdue for serious examination. I voted for the 1996 welfare reform law that established TANF because I support reducing poverty by promoting work. It is just a matter of determining what the most effective way to do that is. And indeed, this law, in combination with a very strong economy and improvements in the earned tax credit, did help prepare more individuals into the workforce back in the 90s. Unfortunately, nearly all of the progress that we experienced from the law in increasing employment levels for single mothers or reducing poverty for children ended in about 2000. And ever since then, most of the major trends have been negative. 4 years of success followed by 14 years of shortcoming is not the greatest record. Why have we seen this failure? Well, I think to start with, the amount of resources available for TANF, the size of the block grant has declined in real terms by almost a third since 1996. And some states, including my home state of Texas, have seen a much sharper decline because Congress refused to renew TANF supplemental grants that expired in 2011. As I said earlier, a smaller and smaller program, portion of poor families, poor children receive TANF, and when folks aren't receiving TANF, they're not participating in TANF work activities like working, education, training, so forth. I look forward to the testimony of each of you so that we can learn how to make genuine improvements that really make effective use of our taxpayer money to accomplish the objective of helping people move from welfare to work and stay in that workforce with a living wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. And without objection, each member will have the opportunity to submit a written statement and have it included in the record at this point. I want to remind our witnesses to limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, and however, without objection, all the written statements and all your written testimony will be made a part of the permanent record. On our panel this afternoon, we'll be hearing from Sandra Collins, Assistant Manager, Goodwill Olympics Rainier Region; Amy Dvorak, Employer Relations Coordinator, New York State Erie County Department of Social Services; Robert Dorr, Morwich Fellow, Poverty Studies, American Enterprise Institute; Dan Bloom, Director, Health and Barriers to Employment Policy area. Now, the first witness we will have testify today is one that I'm personally proud to have here and to have the privilege to introduce. Ms. Collins came all the way to Washington, D.C. from Washington State to be here today to share her story. And it takes a lot of courage to share a story that has been a struggle. I think all of us can relate to stories within our own families that maybe get retold and told, and maybe you're going through a current story in your own family that you can identify with. But those stories build character, build strength, and build a person like Sandra. And we're so happy to have you here to share your success with us. And as Mr. Doggett said, to help us, members of this committee, subcommittee, and the members of the full committee, understand what we can do to help people get back to work and off welfare and have a smile on their face like you have right now. And I know you're a little nervous, but you're going to do just fine. So you're recognized for 5 minutes, Sandra. Welcome. Yes.
Chairman Reichart, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the committee, it is an honor for me to sit before you today to tell you my success story. I am Sandra Collins, and I am now the Assistant Manager at Goodwill Outlet store in Kent, Washington. I'm about to become a homeowner. I've come a long way. In April of 2007, my life looked very different. I was homeless, living in a shelter with 2 children, had been a meth abuser for 17 years, a victim of domestic violence, and I felt alone. I had burned all my relationships with my family and friends. I had 0 credit, no high school diploma, and a stack of legal offenses that kept me from a driver's license. My self-worth and confidence were at all-time lows. It was time for a change, but I didn't know how to get it started. I went to apply for TANF and enrolled in the Work First Community Jobs program. I was assigned to my caseworker, Cindy, and she was the first of many trusting relationships for me. I was closed about my problems with her at first, a fear of having my children taken away, losing my financial assistance, or being put in jail. My license had been suspended, and I didn't tell Cindy that I was homeless. It took a few months to start to build trust. Cindy got me placed into a work program at a Goodwill Outlet store close to my GED class site. It turned out to be the best job for me and would change my life permanently. Without a car and living 2.5 miles from the bus stop, my commute was 4 hours a day round trip. But I was punctual and I worked hard. I even volunteered to do additional work. Things were real dark. There was a glimmer of hope breaking through. I knew the power of having a job would help me escape poverty. My manager was willing to flex with my commute schedule. Not only did I expand my work skills, but coworkers showed real happiness to see me. I felt special and important. I had meaning in my life and gained self-worth. It made me want to return every day. Cindy enrolled me in a program that provided me with transportation to the bus stop, making my commute so much shorter. Cindy's role as a case manager was critical. Eventually, I did open up about my problems, and Cindy provided resources or solutions for all of them. I didn't feel as helpless or alone anymore. She even helped me get my license back. When the community jobs program ended, I had my GED, and my Tacoma outlet store manager, impressed with my hard work, recommended me for the perfect full-time job at a Goodwill store. I remember my first day very clearly. January 15th, 2008. I started at the Lakewood Goodwill as a production worker. That April, the original Tacoma outlet store had an opening and asked me to return. It felt like a great accomplishment to be wanted back. I remember thinking that I am somebody. In July of 2008, I was promoted to supervisor at the Tacoma outlet store. Work had changed my life. The people were supportive, and as I worked hard and proved myself. While working, other Goodwill services also made a huge difference. I took the Goodwill Financial Literacy course and opened a bank account. The course taught me how to set goals. My short-term goals were to focus on staying clean and sober, getting to work every day, keeping my kids safe and on a good path. My long-term goals were get a car and a house and become a manager. I jotted them down as a pie in the sky. In 2009, I enrolled in a Goodwill Wheels to Work program, and I was able to get financing for my own car. I'm proud to say I'll be buying my own home for my family in August. Since becoming a supervisor, I have had an amazing opportunity to bring on people who have faced similar problems. Out of the 36 employees at my store, 13 are community job program graduates, and a few others are enrolled in the program now. I take great pride in serving as a mentor and helping them. People call me the volunteer queen because I always have community job participants placed at my site. Because of my experiences, community jobs participants open up to me about their lives. I am able to give back to them what was given to me. Support, encouragement, challenges, and resources. Now it is time for me to set some new goals. I just interviewed for a Goodwill store manager position, and I got it. In closing, people like me need a second chance to get our lives back on a better path. Goodwill and the Washington Workforce Community Jobs Program gave me and many others that chance. I could not have done it alone. Thank you, and my family thanks you, for the federal funding and support that has helped me get to where I am at today. These programs make a difference, and I am living proof of it, because jobs change lives. Thank you.
Well, Sandra, that was a pretty powerful testimony. The other three still want to continue? Congratulations on your promotion, and congratulations on the purchase of your home, too. Good job. Ms. Dvorak, unfortunately, you get to follow. You're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the committee. Before I begin, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the Erie County Department of Social Services and the Pivot Program. In September of 2000, the Erie County Department of Social Services initiated a job training program called the Pivot Program. This unique wage subsidy initiative was designed to bridge the gap between the local business community and welfare recipients, and is based on the premise that welfare reform success requires that TANF recipients play an active role and become a part of the business community. The goal of the Pivot Program is to provide incentives to employers to hire clients with multiple barriers and those that may need more time on the job training. Pivot provides quality job opportunities for the employable TANF population while serving as a resource for the hiring needs of local employers. Job developers match employable TANF clients with companies looking to fill existing positions. All candidates are pre-screened for job compatibility, including matching a client's skills, abilities, and education with the job specs. The employers must be an existing company and have permanent, long-term positions. Pivot is always looking to work with companies where there is room for advancement and higher paying wages. The employer benefits include a 6-month subsidy that covers 100% of the client's wages. Employers are involved in the interviewing process and provided an opportunity to select from multiple candidates. The employer receives a 3-month advance when the client is first hired to cover initial training costs. The contract is then reconciled before final payment is made to the employer. The employer is able to reduce hiring and training costs and is able to participate in monthly job fairs, enabling the company to interview and recruit new prospective employees. Many clients' cases close within a month of obtaining employment, and case management is provided to help guarantee these clients do not return to welfare and receive public benefits. The benefits to social services include client placement into employment and reduction of the cash grant and the closing of cases due to employment. Another benefit is the development of community partnerships for placement of unsubsidized clients. By developing good working relationships with employers, job developers are able to make additional placements for other DSS clients not eligible for Pivot. We have learned from employer feedback that prospective employees lack soft skills needed to be successful in jobs. In an effort to address this need and broaden the base of Pivot-eligible candidates, the Pivot program works hand in hand with the Work Experience program. Erie County has developed a model of neighborhood hub sites at various not-for-profit sites located in the north, south, east, and west of the city. These work experience hubs were developed to increase participation in federally accountable work activities by making work sites more accessible to TANF clients. These sites are located in neighborhoods where TANF clients live and combine work experience with vocational and education programs, computer training, high school equivalency, and English as a second language classes. There is a job developer assigned to every hub site. This person goes out weekly and meets with the clients that are ready to be placed into employment. The client will continue to work with the job developer until placement occurs. Several of our supervisors at these hub sites are former clients that were working with our job development unit. They were referred for positions based on their leadership qualities, excellent attendance, and motivation at the work site. One of the biggest problems businesses have is attracting and retaining high-quality employees. Businesses want employees that can come to work every day, be punctual, communicate with their supervisor, and be a good team player. The number one reason people lose their job is time and attendance. The number two reason is problems with their supervisor. With Pivot, the job developer initially acts like a mentor between the client and supervisor. The client is provided extensive case management services when they first begin their employment. Follow-up is provided to assure supportive services are in place, which include transportation and child care. Some of the businesses that have been targeted and successful with Pivot are nursing homes, hospitals, banks, hotels, call centers, manufacturing and industrial companies, small and large businesses, food service, not-for-profits, and community agencies. The Pivot program currently works with over 300 businesses in Western New York and is always evolving based on the time of year and labor trends. Since 2000, over 4,300 clients have been placed in Pivot with an average of 460 per year. The Pivot program is funded through by the Flexible Fund for Family Services, which is a federal allocation. The success of Pivot has proved that when people are given support and the opportunity to work, they can be successful in their life, role models for their children, and can be self-sufficient.
Thank you, Mr. Bork. Good job.
Thanks.
Mr. Dorr.
Thank you, Chairman Reichert, Ranking Member Doggett, and other members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I greatly appreciate being invited to discuss subsidized jobs programs and their role in alleviating poverty. My name is Robert Dorr, and I'm the Mortgage Fellow in Poverty Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Prior to joining AEI, I spent 18 years working in government social services programs for the state and city of New York. My experience with the management of subsidized or transitional jobs program has given me considerable insight into how these programs are actually serving welfare recipients, insight which I would like to share now. The most important objective and key outcome for assistance programs is lasting employment for the recipient. Not only is full-time employment the surest way to avoid poverty, but earnings are the most important form of income for a family. only 3% of all full-time workers are defined as being in poverty by our nation's official poverty measure. The strong emphasis that programs such as the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families place on helping applicants and recipients move into employment as rapidly as possible clearly acknowledges the fundamental role employment has in helping people out of poverty. In the years following the passage of Welfare Reform Act of 1996, it became apparent that resulting increases in work opportunities and consequent earnings was the main reason child poverty and overall poverty fell during those years. More workforce participation, especially by single mothers, resulted in higher earnings and a substantial decrease in poverty. While employment and its consequent earnings are key to alleviating poverty, it is also important to remember that we already subsidize jobs. The Earned Income Tax Credit, public health insurance, supplemental nutrition assistance program benefits, and child care assistance are the largest but not the only government assistance programs that can greatly increase the resources available to low-income working households. It is in this context, with the recognition of existing programs that already work to shore up low wages, and the focus on rapid employment in unsubsidized jobs, that we must evaluate whether subsidized or transitional jobs are an effective tool to help people in need. In New York City, we ran a large and I believe effective subsidized jobs program, but it was only a limited part of our overall effort. In New York, we worked with the Parks Department to form the Parks Opportunity Program, which created job positions lasting 6 to 9 months and consisting of 4 work days and 1 training day each week. The program was designed to serve a discrete subset of welfare recipients. Participants were primarily compliant, hard-to-place clients who had been on welfare assistance for more than 1 year and were not in sanctioned status. Additionally, for a time we offered subsidized jobs to clients in shelters who agreed to leave the shelter. We also offered transitional jobs to compliant, though out of work, non-custodial parents whose children were on welfare assistance. While this program worked well for some recipients, participants did not exit the program with any increase in their probability of finding future employment over those cash assistance recipients in our regular program. The placement rate was similar to the rate for welfare recipients in our program in both our Back to Work and Work First programs. The key lesson we took away from the Parks Department program that was while the availability of subsidized jobs was beneficial for a portion of our caseload, the program itself was more costly and not effective enough to justify more than a limited investment. Upon exiting the program, placement rates were roughly equal to other work programs, but they had incurred a much higher cost. Ultimately, we need to ensure that the actions we take in creating job opportunities end in positive results and provide paths to consistent long-term employment. While subsidized jobs programs may produce those results for some individuals in some sectors, they cannot replace a focus on rapid attachment to unsubsidized employment for regular public assistance recipients. I should also point out that there were also other benefits associated with the Parks program. First of all, the Parks Department got additional assistance in manpower to do jobs they might not have been able to do without the support of a program like ours. In addition, for those members of our public assistance caseload who would not be able to receive the generous work supports that generally go to households with children in them, subsidized programs, these are mostly single individuals and often young men, subsidized programs were an avenue to get them into work that we did not have and we did need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Mr. Bloom, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to testify about the research evidence on subsidized employment. My name is Dan Bloom, and I'm with MDRC, a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization. I'd like to use my time to make 3 general points about subsidized employment. The first point is about goals. Subsidized employment is a broad term that means different things to different people. Some subsidized employment programs are designed primarily to provide work-based income support, that is, to put money into the pockets of unemployed workers during periods of high unemployment. These are sometimes called counter-cyclical programs. The best known of this type of program operated during the Great Depression, but many of the state programs that were supported by the TANF Emergency Fund in 2009 and 10 also fit into this category. Other subsidized employment programs are explicitly designed to improve people's long-term success in the labor market. They're much smaller, and they target people facing serious obstacles to steady work, people coming home from prison, long-term TANF recipients, and others. Some models, called transitional jobs programs, place people into what might be called practice jobs with nonprofit organizations so they can learn to work by working. Others offer subsidies to private employers to hire program participants, and some programs do both. When assessing the success of a particular program, it's critical to consider the program's goals. A large, broadly targeted countercyclical program might be judged on its ability to get going quickly and provide meaningful work to large numbers of people who would not otherwise be working. In this respect, I think the TANF Emergency Fund experience was quite positive. States were able to scale up programs in a very short period, and they put about 280,000 people to work, including youth and summer jobs. In contrast, transitional jobs programs that are designed to improve participants' success in the labor market could be assessed, at least in part, based on the longer-term employment patterns of their participants, as well as other related measures like reduced recidivism for ex-prisoners or reduced reliance on public benefits for welfare recipients. My second point is about evidence. Over the last 30 or 40 years, there have been a number of rigorous evaluations of subsidized employment programs. Many of these studies used a random assignment design, which is the gold standard for studies of this type. And these studies tested the kinds of programs that were explicitly designed to improve people's long-term success in the labor market. And the results are mixed. On the one hand, we've seen that programs can generate very large increases in employment initially because they give subsidized jobs to lots of people who would not otherwise be working. We studied one program for ex-prisoners that also reduced recidivism and saved money for the government. On the other hand, most of these programs did not lead to sustained increases in unsubsidized employment. In other words, it doesn't look like the subsidized work experience helped people get or keep regular jobs. The main exception to this pattern is a few programs that provided temporary wage subsidies to private employers who hired people from certain disadvantaged groups. There's some evidence that these programs have increased employment even beyond the subsidy period. The issue has been that most of these programs have been small and selective in who they served. One key question for any program that subsidizes private employers is whether employers are receiving a windfall for hiring the same kinds of people they would have hired anyway. Unfortunately, this is a hard question to answer. Studies can test whether providing subsidies for a particular group of job seekers improves the odds that they will find work, but it's almost impossible to know for certain whether this ends up displacing other similar workers. My final point is that I think there's some hope for the future. The Department of Labor and Health and Human Services are both conducting multi-site evaluations of the next generation of subsidized employment programs. Although the projects were developed separately, DOL and HHS are collaborating closely in carrying them out, and MDRC is fortunate to be leading both projects. Together, the two projects are using random assignment designs to evaluate about a dozen different subsidized employment models. Here's one example. In Los Angeles, we're testing two programs for TANF recipients who completed an initial job search activity but were unable to find work. One model provides fully subsidized jobs with public or nonprofit employers for up to 6 months. In the other model, participants are placed with private employers but remain on the program payroll for the first 2 months of employment. Then they move to the employer's payroll, and the employer receives a partial subsidy for 4 additional months. Employers are expected to retain participants after the subsidy ends. All of the models in both projects are aiming to address the limitations of earlier transitional jobs programs, in part by using subsidies to help participants get a foot in the door with private employers. A key question is whether these private sector-focused models can be effective for less job-ready participants. Results from these projects will start to become available next year. In sum, subsidized employment is a valuable tool for providing work-based income support, particularly during periods of high unemployment. To date, the results from programs that try to use subsidized employment to improve long-term employment outcomes for hard-to-employ groups are mixed, but we are now testing a new set of models that were developed specifically to address the limitations of earlier programs. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to our questions. So, Ms. Collins, thanks again for being here, and I know maybe sometimes you don't get to pause, or maybe you do get to pause and think about how far you've come from being homeless and without work in 2007, beating the addictions that you just talked about, and getting your GED, being hired as a full-time employee, now being promoted to manager, buying your own home, and now here you are in the Capitol testifying before Congress. So you've come a long way, as they say. We want to make sure that others have that kind of success, and your testimony is powerful. But I'm wondering if you could just share with me a little bit, given your experience as, you know, a participant in the program and now someone who supervises other people, and as you said, you described as the volunteer queen, so people want to be around you and they want to learn from you and watch you work. What do you think are some of the key features of the programs that made you successful and that will help those that you're working with now be successful?
I think the biggest thing was that I was uncomfortable with the case manager being into the Washington, you know, the Department of Social and Services office. I felt if I was open with her and truly expressed the barriers that I had, more bad things would happen to me. And so I think with people who have bigger barriers, with programs being a little bit longer, being able to have time to you know, get to know the person and really dig down and find out what those barriers are. And, you know, when the program is going, it's, you know, designed to be 6 months. If they're seeing progress in the person, but they're not yet where they need to be, or their barriers still haven't been addressed or worked through, then, you know, maybe expanding the program a little longer.
Additional help and
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else that you can think of that really played a key role in helping you get your feet on the ground, that you can see, you know, thinking of some of the people that you work with, anything else that you could see might be helpful?
Well, with the people that I work with now, I remember where I came from, and I remember the support that I had from my case manager. And so I try to work in conjunction with their case managers by identifying at the work site any issues that, you know, might be of concern. And I share those with the case manager, and that's, you know, usually breaks the ice a little bit.
Yeah.
When I'm able to see the person every day at the work site versus the case manager once a week.
So it sounds to me like you need somebody who cares, somebody who'll be with you long term, and somebody that you can learn to trust.
Yes.
And open up to and begin to build your life.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Dvorak, Erie County in New York has and operates a program where you place welfare recipients in subsidized jobs for 6 months. And you report great success in moving people from welfare to work as a result. And your program differs from some others, I think, as Mr. Bloom has pointed out. You place your recipients in private sector jobs, and the employer pays the employee directly, versus in some state agencies, they basically provide a free employee. The state pays the paycheck. Do you feel the structure impacts the success of your program? And what other features of your program do you believe contribute to its success in moving people from welfare to work?
I think there is a huge difference. I meet with employers all the time, and I work with CEOs, and employers have been incredibly supportive. But when I sell the program, I sell it that you're going to hire someone off the street. All I'm asking is that you give my TANF recipients an opportunity to interview for jobs like anybody else. We're giving you the carrot. We're giving you six months of gross wages because they need longer time in training. We'll provide additional supports. We'll provide case management. But when I sell it, I'm selling it, it's a long-term position, an existing position in the company. So the position is already there. I'm just asking that they look at my clients and they consider them. But it's an existing position, so it's not, I never go in saying this is temporary employment, and you can let, you know, if you don't like the person in 6 months, it's okay, you can let them go. They're hiring them like they would anybody else, so that it's a permanent position. So I do think it makes a big difference how it's presented to the employer, because they're making an investment in this person. Their staff is training this person to their specifications, and the client is going thinking they have a long-term, full-time job. We always try and make the contract full-time because how are they going to be self-sufficient if it's not long, you know, if it's not full-time? So I think you gotta, you know, like you said, you gotta break down the barriers. I think it takes a lot. I think a lot of case management to break those barriers down, but I truly believe if you can empower somebody, that once they start to earn a paycheck, which is a big difference, when they're getting a paycheck from a company opposed to getting paid from an agency,
Right.
there's a huge difference in how they start to feel about themselves. They want to do better.
Right.
I think it has a lot to do with how they feel about themselves, about their self-esteem. I think it's baby steps, but I think we've seen the change.
I think that you just validated the comments by Ms. Collins, that long-term relationship and that stability in life and building that trust. I think those things all sound very key to the success of people that are going through this. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you very much. Ms. Dvorak, do you keep data on how many of these folks get terminated when the subsidy ends or within a short time thereafter?
Well, I'll be honest with you. If they decide they don't like the person, a day after the 6 months, I call them and say, you know what, we won't be doing business with you anymore. Because I know if they like the person up to that point and they don't like them the day after, this is not a revolving door. And we aren't going to supply your workforce, on a subsidy. So, they know that I'm not going to do business with them again.
Have you had to do that very much through the life of the program?
No, because I make it pretty clear. But when we do it, we don't do business with them again.
And what type of services do you provide for the employee to try to ensure that they meet the expectations of the employer as they're during that period of subsidy?
Okay, so if there are issues that come up, a case manager goes out to that company and meets with that client and will say, you're right on the edge, what's going on? Because they really don't have conflict resolution skills, they don't have a lot of coping skills. That's when we need to intervene and provide a lot of support. Because we can get them on the right track, but we got to do a lot of hand-holding at the beginning, and slowly we can wean them off. But it's not like you got to do it individually, because some people have a lot of issues. Sometimes you never know when you can be on the other side.
Exactly.
It could just be a crisis, a health crisis in someone's life, and they have a work history and they could do well. Other people have a lot of barriers, so those are big steps to overcome.
I salute what you've accomplished and certainly what Ms. Collins exemplifies. I'm wondering, in looking at the studies that you're doing, Mr. Bloom, what you think you will be able to tell us about the services that need to be replicated in order to increase the chances that these programs will be successful?
Yeah, I think an important thing to know about these two studies that are going on, one with HHS and one with DOL, is that they were explicitly designed to try to address the limitations of some of the earlier programs that I was talking about. So what we're looking at, for example, are programs that use a staged approach. So they'll start off with somebody working at like a Goodwill, for example, and then as people progress through the program, they may move into a subsidized position with a private employer. And so that's a different model than what we were tested before, because in the past, we tested a lot of transitional jobs programs that had difficulty with the transition. So they were able to give people jobs and they did meaningful work, but when it came time to transition them into a permanent job, that's where the trouble started. So some of the programs that we're looking at now build in a more seamless transition through a series of steps so that people can try to end up in a permanent position rather than just a subsidized position.
And Mr. Dorr, the experience you described with the New York Parks Department was one where, as I understand it, the people that were in the program didn't do any better in getting long-term employment than those that received no subsidized employment at all.
Yes, that's correct. We had a large program in New York City where the vast majority of welfare recipients went into what we call back to work or work first programs that were intended to get them into employment rapidly. And we had placement rates of in the 25% range measured a certain way. And then we had others that we would select for these transitional jobs programs. Smaller group would have this 6-month employment at some significant cost, plus training, plus job search, and their placement rate in permanent employment in the period after that ended was about 20%. So we had done a great deal of effort to get people into work, in that circumstance, but the result was not much better than if we just said to someone, let me see if we can get you into unsubsidized, private sector, usually employment right away, rather than spend this time in this program along the way.
Do either of you have observations about what standards need to be in place, whether the programs need to be focused only at certain populations, or how we can maximize the investment? If every employer had Ms. Dvorak there saying, if the employee doesn't measure up, that's a good reason to dismiss them, but don't count on us to keep circulating people in here every 6 months just to subsidize your endeavors. We're here to try to help the employee. But how, since she can't be all over the country, how we can replicate that kind of thing to ensure that we're helping people get long-term jobs and not just providing a short-term subsidy.
Well, Dan, you might want to, my view was that we have to recognize that people who come apply for public assistance come in a variety of situations.
Exactly.
And if we build a program around permanent subsidized employment or intensive subsidized employment for everybody, we may be doing much more than we need to do for a lot of people. So a lot of people can be helped with getting into employment, job search, get them to employment, take advantage of the work supports that are available for everybody, like earned income tax credit, and you're on your way. Then there are certain populations that might need specialized attention where transitional jobs or subsidized jobs might be appropriate, but it's got to be carefully calibrated for populations that are in particular need.
Mr. Bloom, can I ask you to provide your answer in writing? We have votes about 3:15, so I want to try to move quickly. So
Thank you.
If you could, we'd appreciate it. Mr. Young, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank all our panelists for being here today. I really enjoyed the testimony. Big picture here, we're trying to help people find full-time jobs, recognizing that it is the best way to reduce poverty. It also enhances income mobility and really one's ability to pursue the American dream. Go out there and do exactly what Ms. Collins has exemplified. Over 97% of individuals age 18 to 64 who work full-time have earnings that place them above the poverty line. It's really powerful. So when we're considering ways to get welfare recipients into work and up that income ladder using wage subsidies, we need to be careful that what we're actually doing is what we want them to do, is get jobs in the end. As policymakers, that means putting aside ideological biases, anecdotes we might get back in the district and using those to form our opinions as to the optimal public policies, uninformed sentiments, and so forth. We need to actually look at the available evidence base. And it's limited but growing, which is encouraging, as Mr. Bloom alluded to. Some programs we know that have focused on helping welfare recipients in the past have actually been harmful, and that can be instructive. One example would be in the 80s and 90s, the Targeted Jobs Tax Credit Program, which was a predecessor to the current Work Opportunity Tax Credit Program. It was intended to encourage employers to hire welfare recipients. In 1995, GAO called this program a, quote, inefficient vehicle for increasing unemployment among the economically disadvantaged, often rewarding employers who would have hired disadvantaged workers anyway, a concern on both sides of the aisle. Worse, there were some indications that this program actually prevented hiring of needy individuals whom employers perceived as lacking the skills needed to be hired without the credit, in essence stigmatizing the employees. So I'm concerned about the risk of continuing to make this mistake as we craft future public policies. And we've pointed in the course of this hearing to the existing of some rigorous evidence that tells us how to make programs successful, transitioning from a part-time position or a temporary position, rather, into longer-term sustainable jobs. We have some evidence there. First question would be to Mr. Bloom, and hopefully can answer concisely based on my time limitations, whether we have evidence as well about avoiding this windfall effect to employers and/or evidence pertaining to the stigmatization of potential employees and how we can avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can tell you from experience more than from, hard random assignment evidence, but I think there are two things to avoid this windfall that you could do. One is what we heard about from Erie County, which is to be very clear with the employer up front that there's an expectation that they're going to take this person onto their payroll and make them a permanent employee. The other thing, I think, is to be careful with who's targeted by these programs. You don't want to target an individual for a subsidy, for a subsidized jobs program if they can find a job without a subsidy. And what a lot of agencies will do is they'll have people look for a job first with basic assistance, and the ones who are unsuccessful, those are the ones they might target for the subsidy program. And I think both of those things can help.
Excellent points, well taken. I'm encouraged about the Department of Labor and HHS projects. I think we need to do far more demonstration projects and then robustly evaluate them in this country, especially in the social realm, and then scale up what works based on that evidence. With that said, oftentimes we're hesitant to reveal all of our assumptions, our methodology, and results from these pilot programs in government. We issue press releases when we're successful. We spin or hide when we're not successful. So I have a question. Do you feel as though in these cases, which you've pointed to, there's sufficient opportunity to critique the methodology and learn from the project design and implementation because of its independent assessment and because of what's being provided to policy analysts like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, this is a project, both of these projects are set up in such a way that they're using the strongest possible research designs, and that was required by HHS and DOL. I think we have, total confidence that the results are going to come out and be public regardless of what they are. My organization is well known for putting out information whether it's makes people happy or not, and I'm sure that will happen in this case in both of these projects.
And I didn't mean to insinuate otherwise. I thank you very much for your work, and I yield back.
Mr. Renacci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for testifying today. An estimated 1.8 million Ohioans, my home state, are living below the poverty line, and we know the best way out of poverty is a job. Poverty in my home state of Ohio has increased by approximately 58% over the last decade, despite a stagnant population and a whole host of federal programs created to end this cycle of poverty. We must find ways to address our struggling economy, improve our educational system and workforce training programs, and connect individuals to temporary resources they really need to succeed. Included in the 2012 unemployment insurance reforms, the Department of Labor was granted waiver authority in the UI program. These waivers would allow states to operate demonstration projects to test alternative means of helping the unemployed return to work, including the concept we are talking about today, subsidized jobs. Since this waiver policy was enacted in February 2012, only Texas has applied for waiver, and its application was swiftly denied. States have described the application process created by the Department of Labor as onerous and time-consuming. This Congress, I worked with the Department of Labor to introduce H.R. 3864, the Flexibility to Promote Reemployment Act, a bill that extends the UI waiver authority and provides greater flexibility to states to use existing UI dollars on programs that help the unemployed collect paychecks instead of benefit checks. Mr. Dvorak and Mr. Dorr, your program has been successful in connecting individuals with limited labor force attachments to jobs. Would your program be successful in connecting individuals with greater labor force attachment, like current UI recipients who were previously employed, to jobs?
Many of our clients have, they've let their unemployment run out. They got their extensions, they let their unemployment run out, and then they've come to us. And it's very difficult for them because, they're very rigid, and, this is how much I'm going to accept per hour. I'm not going to work for less. These are the skills I have, and they're very adamant. Well, one of the big pieces about the Pivot program is it's not a standalone program. It's not okay that they're not in a work activity. They have to go somewhere every day and be in a work activity, which goes hand in hand with them also working with a job developer and looking for work. So it's really the whole piece with Pivot. It isn't just that, it's not just looking for work, it's doing the work activity, whether they need a GED, whether they go to the work activity and work in community projects. We also have a project in our parks, which are the Olmsted Parks in Buffalo. But it's dealing with the whole person and the whole piece, and it is all tied in to getting them back into the workforce. And there is a lot of resistance there, but having said that, you know, you've got to work with them and get them back into the workforce. So they're mandated to do a work activity.
Mr. Dorr, do you have any?
Our experience in New York was with welfare recipients who come to the TANF program or the General Assistance Program that existed in New York City. And the one-stops that were under the WIA program dealt more with people who were on UI. And so I can't really speculate on what would happen if in an unemployment insurance program greater flexibility was provided to a locality. But the previous spokesman is right. It is in some respects a different population and may need different approaches.
Yeah. Both of your programs, in your testimony, you describe your experience connecting individuals with subsidized or transitional jobs in the TANF program. What were really some of the common reasons that individuals were unsuccessful in finding employment?
Well, we had a benefit in New York City of having a very vibrant entry-level employment situation for all of the time that I was there, including during the recession. So the opportunities were there, and that was a good thing. I think the principal reason people had trouble is one of two factors. One is they were weak on soft skills and the sort of requirements of the daily rigor of work, and they weren't prepared and ready to step up to that responsibility, and they needed some assistance in getting there.
So, not to interrupt you, but in that case, it's not that they weren't trained, or was training an issue too?
Well, again, there are a lot of opportunities at the entry-level position. And then the second would be there were language barriers and literacy barriers. I mean, if I would say that was one that was the most significant, that would be it.
Thank you. My time has run up. I yield back.
Mr. Davis, recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for being here. Ms. Collins, let me commend and congratulate you for your successes, and I think that you are the epitome of what can and does happen to and with individuals when they're given opportunities and a chance. As a matter of fact, in 2010, the state of Illinois put together a program called Put Illinois to Work, which placed eligible Illinois residents in subsidized employment positions lasting up to 6 months. Put Illinois to Work was a collaborative of the Illinois Department of Human Services, Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and Heartland Human Care Services, using funding from the TANF Emergency Contingency Fund, which was created by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. Illinois invested $10 million to leverage a federal investment of $200 million. The federal emergency TANF funds expired on September 30, 2010. The program was supposed to end November 30, 2010, but Governor Quinn used approximately $50 million in state money to keep the program alive through January of 2011. The program was evaluated, and here's what they found. The program exceeded the goals demanded by employers and workers. It helped tens of thousands of low-income, unemployed, and underemployed Illinoisans. It helped small businesses during economic recession, generated income and revenue, $13.6 million in federal income, and $2.7 million in state income. It provided quality programming that satisfied trainees and employers. 92% of the workers and 88% of the employers said that they would participate in that program or something like it if they had another opportunity to do so. And over 52% of the employers indicated that they would hire the workers permanently if they had the resources and the opportunity to do so, although only 13% of them indicated that they did. Mr. Bloom, I was interested to know, given your experiences and the work that you do, have you noted anything in particular about ex-offenders, individuals who have been incarcerated, and their experiences as they get opportunity for programs like this?
Yeah, I think people who are coming out of prison face in some ways a double issue. Many of them have characteristics that would make it difficult for you to hold a job even if they hadn't been to prison. So they may not have finished high school, or they may have limited work experience. Add on top of that the fact that they now have a criminal record, and surveys have shown that many employers are very reluctant to hire people with criminal records. So there's really a, it's doubly difficult for those folks to get employment. And I think that's why a lot of these transitional jobs programs have tended to focus on individuals coming home to the community from prison, because it is so difficult for them to walk right into the private sector and get hired.
Mr. Dvorak, could you just off the cuff think of what it is that we might be able to do to make these programs or this effort more effective?
I feel that subsidized employment works. So, I'm in the trenches. I work with the clients. I work with the agencies. So for us, it is working. So, it's hard for me to say. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel, but I think we have to look at it more closely. For us, it is working.
So more might be better.
And we work with ex-offenders, and it is very difficult, but there are big employers out there like Home Depot who will give these people an opportunity, and they do promote from within, and they're an amazing employer. So, I think but you have to work one-on-one with these employers.
Thank you very much.
People,
I'm familiar with the Home Depot effort, and they are, in fact, marvelous and do an outstanding job. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Davis. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Ms. Collins, let me start off with you because I know so many folks like you. I'm also an employer. I have had the best experience in the world with having people come into our business and showing that they're really wanted and that they truly do have value, not just value to the dealership, but value as people in our community. If you could share that a little bit, because I don't think there's anything better than to wake up and have the alarm go off, wake up, throw your feet out over the bed, say, you know what, I'm going to go to work today, and I'm going to provide for my kids, and I'm going to put a roof over their head, clothes on them, food on the table, and a chance for the future. So I don't think there's any woman or man out there, when you get up and you have a place to go and a place that you're wanted, that's the key to it. Just share that a little bit. Listen, your testimony was fantastic, but you're the person that we're talking about. You're the person that wants to get back into society, wants to contribute, wants to be part of what makes America great. So just share a little bit more, because I can't imagine that transition. I have people that actually, you know what they did when they got their first paycheck? They came in and talked to me about it, but then they took a copy of it in our copying machine so they could keep it in their wallet just to show these other people that were down on them, you know what, I actually get paid for what I do, and these people like me and they want me back every day. So if you could just share a little bit more of what you do, because it is an incredible story.
Sure. So, one of the biggest turnarounds for me was, especially being a victim of domestic violence and being a meth user for so long, was that I had no self-worth. So the people that I worked with made every day that I went in made me want to go in another day. It was just a happy, positive place to be. When I walked in, they were very excited to see me. Even though I went there and I worked really hard, it made it worth coming back every day. So what I do now with the participants that are at my store is I do the same thing. You have to come with a positive attitude. With positive attitudes come productive employees. I let them know how good of a job they're doing, and I just let them know how important they are to be part of our team, and our team isn't complete without them. It makes them open up to me a lot sooner with any kind of, personal problems or any kind of barriers that they have. And just being able to, like you said, I spend a third of my day at my job. I want to go someplace that's going to be positive and where I feel important, and that's how I want, my employees to feel.
Yeah, I can't imagine your children, how proud they are of their mom. That every day she gets up and she goes to work because of them. So thank you so much. Mr. Vorek, I got to tell you, your program makes sense to me because you take the curse off the call. You say, hey, listen, I want to come talk to you about employing somebody, and it's going to work for you too. This is a win-win situation. That program, what made you pivot to that type? Were you having a different experience in the workforce, trying to get people to actually listen to you? Well, when it came time to talk to an employer and say, I've got a prospective employee, and they say, well, really, get back with me and say, well, here's the point. We can actually work together on this. You can win, they can win. In the long run, you get a great employee. But early on, through that 90 days, you're going to get a chance these people can prove themselves. So
right, and that's the greatest part to me, is going to employers. And when you change people's lives and you meet with CEOs and they see that they can be a part of it, it's amazing when you get them engaged and they buy in. It's great. It's great because it is a win-win for both.
Well, I think, and maybe Mr. Dorr, you can go with this. I think part of the problem, and Mr. Young and I were just talking, we have a criminal justice code that really takes people who are substance abuse people and makes them criminals, and they're addicts, and they have a very difficult time. They want to get back into life, and they want to be part of society, but they're constantly put down because of the way they're identified and the way they're labeled. But I think the other problem, and maybe you suggested, you talked about people with soft work. If you stay off the field too long, you don't want to get back in the game. If you make it too easy to stay at home, I think you have to attach that work, getting work to get the benefit. Your experience in New York and people walking away from jobs, that's not good enough for me, but maybe it's somebody else. So the soft issue, what is that exactly, so people understand that?
Well, one of the things I found most interesting about Mr. Bloom's testimony was his reference to the program called CEO in the city that focuses on people coming back from prison. And my experience with them, I knew them, I worked with them, I funded them in part through city funding. I found them to be very focused on getting people ready and understanding the basic requirements of a job, and then getting them into work in a way that they then felt they were getting something in return. So it's both a combination of from within and that they get a real return at the end of the day for work done. So it's tricky, all this work, but I would look at what CEO was doing with reentry people because they had a good model.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry I've run out of time, but I want to tell you, I think this investment, and the return on this investment for the American taxpayer is really a positive one, and you're all doing great work. Please keep it up and let us know how we can help you. But thanks so much, and I yield back, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Crawley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We thank each of you for testifying today. I appreciate having this hearing today and particularly focusing on helping families go to work and escaping poverty. I have to say, Mr. Chairman, this may be the least acrimonious subject we've discussed in the entire session. And in particular, Ms. Collins, I want to congratulate you on your success in your life. It's outstanding. As was mentioned earlier by the chairman, and anyone who follows you does so at their own risk. And I applaud the others for having followed through and for contributing in a mighty way as well. I believe that subsidized job programs are one of the key tools in our arsenal to get families into the workforce and out of poverty. I support these programs, but I don't support them at the expense, per se, of cutting other worthwhile programs as well. It goes hand in hand with programs like SNAP, which, Mr. Dorr, I can't help but notice that you list in your testimony as an important work subsidy as well. And that's why I'm surprised that, not to embarrass any of my colleagues here, but my colleagues on the other side of the aisle all voted to cut the SNAP program as part of the Republican budget proposal earlier this year. And I see Mr. Dorr's testimony also mentions that the child tax credit is another important work subsidy. And I guess that's why I was also surprised to see that my colleagues last week my Republican colleagues voted to reduce or eliminate the child tax credit for hundreds of thousands of American children and their families. I was even more surprised because this came the day after the big thinker of the Republican Party, my good friend, Mr. Ryan, released his ideas of how to lift Americans out of poverty. And despite all the evidence from every direction that SNAP and the child tax credit and other policies are critical pieces of keeping Americans afloat, the so-called poverty plan includes cuts to SNAP and other vital social programs. What it doesn't include is policies that actually help lift people out of poverty, and Ms. Collins has given her own life example as an example to us all, like the very subsidized work programs that we're discussing here today, like investments in education from early childhood to higher education and in job training, like an increase in the minimum wage, which would not only increase wages to millions of American workers, but it would also reduce the need to put on programs like nutrition assistance in the first place. I won't ask Ms. Collins, but I'm sure she would like to see a raise in the minimum wage, but I won't ask that question. Instead, this poverty plan is just the House Republican budget dressed up with a different bow on top. The fact is, the Republican Ryan proposal is their worst idea since their last idea. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just yield back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. I warned the panel beforehand that we might have some comments that might be political in nature, but I think the bottom line is that what you heard Mr. Crowley say in the beginning is that everybody on this panel, and I think everybody in Congress, including the staff, wants to come up with a way to help people get on their feet, get a job, and have a future as Ms. Collins has described. And that's the effort here. And those things that we have disagreements on are disagreements, if I can say, Mr. Crowley, disagreements on how we get there. And I think that's where we have the battle. I think Mr. Doggett alluded to that also. So,
Mr.
again,
Chairman, the chairman yield?
yes, I'll yield.
Mr. Chairman, I would hope that you would not interpret the words that I spoke as being political, in the sense that everything that I talked about is in bill form and in legislation that we Democrats are in support of and would like to see advanced here in the House of Representatives. That's not a political.
Reclaiming my time.
That's a legislative position that we're taking.
Reclaiming my time. Matter of interpretation of legislation and the wording and the legislation language is always, you know, one party or another has a different view.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield one last time?
No. So I want to take a moment to thank all of you and appreciate your testimony. I think this was a very beneficial hearing in that you all provided information that we can all use, all of us together, and move forward. Again, the bottom line here is that we're all dedicated to trying to find a way to put people back to work. And you may not know some of the background of some of the members of this committee. Mr. Davis has an interesting background to share. I think we all do, but every now and then I think it's important for you to know that not all of us are Princeton, Harvard, Yale graduates. I was a runaway myself from my home. I was a victim of domestic violence as the oldest of 7. And I actually lived in the Kent Valley, so where now you're employed in the Kent Valley. I went to Cape Meridian High School. It's a place that I know very well. And maybe I'll stop by the Kent Goodwill and say hello to you. Would that be all right? Okay. Thank you all so much for your testimony, and have a great day.